Israel captures Gaza's vital Rafah crossing. Many Palestinians loaded their belongings into trucks, donkey carts, rickshaws and other vehicles, while others dismantled their tents and moved elsewhere, fleeing the Israeli army's incursion into the town on the southern edge of Gaza. The Israeli evacuation order forced Palestinians in Rafah to once again uproot their families for an unknown fate, exhausted by months of living in tent camps, or crammed into schools or other shelters in and around the city. Israeli forces seized control of Gaza's key Rafah border crossing on Tuesday in what the White House described as a limited operation, amid fears of a full-scale occupation of the southern city and talks with Hamas over a ceasefire. Hostage release remains on a knife's edge. The closure of Rafah from Egypt and Kerem Shalom, another key crossing from Israel to Gaza, could disrupt the flow of aid to the Palestinians, the UN has warned. Famine was experienced. The Israeli attack came after hours of whiplash in the now 7-month-old Israel-Hamas war, with the militant group saying it accepted a ceasefire proposal on Monday, saying Israel had backed away from its key demands. The high-profile diplomatic moves and military maneuvers offered a glimmer of hope for an agreement to bring at least a pause in the war that has killed more than 34,700 Palestinians and devastated the Gaza Strip, according to local health officials. President Biden said the U.S. would not provide Israel with offensive weapons it could use to launch an all-out assault on the southern Gaza city of Rafah. College administrators around the world are taking different approaches in their responses to protests against the Israel-Hamas war. Hamas said on Monday it had accepted an Egyptian-Qatari ceasefire proposal, but Israel said the deal did not meet its main demands and was pressing ahead with plans to attack Rafah. However, Israel has announced that the talks will continue. The Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings are critical entry points for food, medicine and other supplies for Gaza's 2.3 million people. The small Erez crossing between Israel and northern Gaza remains open, but remains closed for at least 2 days. With the capture of the Rafah crossing, Israel regained full control over the entry and exit of people and goods for the first time since withdrawing troops and settlers from Gaza in 2005, despite a long-standing blockade of the coastal enclave in cooperation with Egypt. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the crossing's capture as an important step in eroding Hamas military and administrative capabilities, and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said the Rafah operation would be deepened if talks over a hostage deal fail. Osama Hamdan, a Beirut-based Hamas official, said the militant group would not respond to military pressure or threats and would not accept an occupation force at the Rafah crossing. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said the operation on the Gaza-Egypt border in East Rafah was not an Israeli invasion of the city. Kirby said Israel described it as a limited-scale operation aimed at preventing arms smuggling to Hamas. Kirby expressed optimism about the ceasefire talks, saying Israel and Hamas must be able to close the remaining gaps to complete a deal. He also said that CIA Chief William Burns will participate in the discussions in Cairo with the representatives of Israel, Egypt, and Qatar. Hamas has sent a delegation to Cairo, which will meet separately with Arab mediators. The fighting has forced the evacuation of the Abu Yusuf al-Najjar hospital, one of the main medical centers receiving casualties from airstrikes in Rafah in recent weeks. It is not clear how many patients have been transferred. The move threatens to deepen the rift between Israel and its main backer, the United States, who say they are concerned about the fate of the roughly 1.3 million Palestinians gathered in Rafah, most of whom have fled fighting elsewhere. A photo provided by the Israel Defense Forces shows a tank with an Israeli flag entering the Gazan side of the Rafah border crossing, Tuesday, May 7, 2024. Biden again warned Netanyahu on Monday against launching an occupation of the city after Israel ordered 100,000 Palestinians to evacuate parts of Rafah. But Netanyahu's far-right allies have threatened to topple Netanyahu's government if he ends the offensive or makes more concessions in ceasefire talks. A senior Biden administration official said late Tuesday that the U.S. suspended shipments of bombs to Israel last week amid concerns that Israel was approaching a decision to launch a full-scale attack on Rafah against U.S. interests. The U.S. has historically provided massive military aid to Israel, accelerating after the October 7 attack by Hamas that sparked the war. The suspended shipment was to include 1,800 2,000-pound, 900 kilograms, bombs and 1,700 smaller bombs, officials said, as the U.S. focused on how to use the larger bombs in dense urban settings. Anonymity to discuss sensitive topic. Officials said that no final decision has been taken on the continuation of the export later. Palestinian jubilation over Hamas' acceptance of a ceasefire turned to fear on Tuesday. Families fled eastern Rafah on foot or in vehicles and donkey carts loaded with mattresses and supplies. Children watched as their parents dismantled their tents in sprawling camps that filled the Rafah for months to move on to their next destination. For many it remained uncertain. Palestinians look at the destruction after an Israeli strike on a residential building in Rafah, Gaza Strip, Tuesday, May 7, 2024. Netanyahu only cares about coming out on top. He doesn't care about children. I don't think he would agree, Najwa al-Saksauk said as her family huddled amid plumes of black smoke as Israeli strikes rang out. The families of Israel's captives also saw their hopes turn to despair. Rodham Cooper, whose 85-year-old father Amaram was among those kidnapped during the October 7 attack by Hamas, slammed what he said was government inaction on a deal. "We see all kinds of explanations, this is not the agreement we gave them, and Hamas changed it without saying anything," Cooper told a parliamentary hearing on Tuesday. He questioned whether military pressure was an effective bargaining tactic. Israel's 401st Brigade took operational control of the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing early Tuesday, the military said. Military footage showed Israeli flags flying from tanks in the area. According to the report, the army and airstrikes targeted Hamas centers in Rafah. The military claimed it had intelligence that the crossing was being used for terrorist purposes, although it did not immediately provide evidence. It said a mortar attack by Hamas fighters near the crossing killed 4 Israeli soldiers near Kerem Shalom on Sunday and that more mortars and rockets were fired from the area on Tuesday. Israeli authorities denied the UN Office of Humanitarian Affairs access to the Rafah crossing on Tuesday, its spokesman, Jens Lark, said. "All fuel for aid trucks and generators comes through Rafah," Lerka said, "with a very small buffer of about a day's worth of fuel." A Palestinian injured in an Israeli bombardment in the Gaza Strip is rushed to a hospital in Rafah, southern Gaza Strip, Tuesday, May 7, 2024. At least 23 Palestinians, including 6 women and 5 children, were killed in overnight Israeli attacks and bombings in Rafah, according to hospital records. Mohammed Abu Amra said his wife, 2 brothers, a sister and a daughter-in-law died when their house was struck by a strike while they were sleeping. "We did nothing. We don't have Hamas," he said. Egypt's foreign ministry condemned the seizure of the Rafah crossing, calling it a dangerous escalation. It had previously warned that any invasion of Rafah, considered part of the demilitarized border zone, or an attack that would force Palestinians to flee to Egypt would threaten the 1979 peace accord with Israel. Netanyahu said the offensive to capture Rafah, which Israel describes as Hamas's last major stronghold in Gaza, was crucial to destroying Hamas after an October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel that killed nearly 1,200 people and took nearly 250 hostages. The United States, Egypt and Qatar spent months brokering a ceasefire and freeing 100 hostages and the remains of 30 others held by Hamas. Netanyahu and other top officials have publicly rejected those demands, saying they plan to launch an offensive after any hostages are freed and continue until Hamas is destroyed. Now, hostages are Hamas's most powerful bargaining chip and human shields for its leaders. An Egyptian official and a Western diplomat said the draft document approved by Hamas contained only minor changes from the version previously put forward by the US with Israeli approval. The changes were made in consultation with the CIA chief, who accepted the draft before sending it to Hamas, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss the negotiations. According to a copy released by Hamas, the proposal for the phased release of the hostages is defined as the gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, ending with a sustainable calm and a permanent cessation of military and hostile activities.